Hello and welcome to COP Conversations, a special broadcast series where Carbon Copy breaks down the politics, promises, and power plays at COP30, with a sharp focus on what it means for India and the Global South. I'm Archana Chaudhary, and for our opening episode, I'm thrilled to introduce Toni, CEO of COP30. Anna, thank you for being here. We welcome you.
Thank you so much, Ashana, for having me here.
Shall we dive straight into our questions? What are the most concrete implementation outcomes that Brazil as a host hopes to achieve at COP30? And what will be the critical decision points that you would like to highlight during these negotiations?
I think one of the key objectives for us of COP30, there are three actually, one of them is to strengthen climate multilateralism. We all know that we can only tackle climate in a multilateral way. And as the geopolitics is there is so much tension in the geopolitics, we feel COP30 will be a key moment to strengthen climate multilateralism. Second, we needed to make sure that people value the role that COPs and the UNFCCC is doing in terms of taking us from where we were in terms of how much emissions we were going to take to where we are now. So we have started the transition. Obviously, we are still far from the transition, but in order to do that, we need to make sense for real people. So the actions that we take at COPs need to relate to real people's life. And I think that will be an important contribution of COP30. And that's why our focus is accelerating actions based on the solutions that we already have and trying to accelerate and give scale to the solutions that we have.
But one of the key things that everybody is looking for in this COP is the Baku to Belém roadmap, which looks to mobilize $1.3 trillion by 2035. While that was done last year, there is a gap between the pledged amounts and the delivered amounts when it comes to climate finance. What are the specific mechanisms that your COP presidency plans to push to ensure transparency, accountability, and to track real-time progress of finance in this COP?
As you know, in COP29, what was agreed is the mobilization of 300 billion from developed to developing countries. So that's the agreement that was done. What was asked from the president of COP29 and COP30 is to come up at COP30 with a report on how to mobilize 1.3 trillion, especially from the private sector. So how to do that? This is not, at least at the moment, this is not agreed that will be even an agenda item to talk about this report or to negotiate the report. But what we feel very strongly that, as we know, most of the mobilization of finance is not done normally by environmental ministers or delegates that comes to COPs. They are done by finance ministers, by development banks, multilateral, bilateral. So we hope that the report of 1.3 and the process of creating this report is already mobilizing a lot of the discussions on what can and should be done to mobilize 1.3. For example, throughout the G20 that Brazil was president, we brought together finance ministers, central bank presidents, as well as climate ministers and foreign affairs ministers to come together and say what needs to be done to mobilize resources for developing countries. Some of what we learned from there together with the finance ministers is that, for example, reform of the multilateral banks is absolutely vital. We also need to make the climate funds more fit for purpose, more agile, more accessible to especially least developed countries. We also know that we will need new forms of finance, so solidarity levies or other types of levies will be fundamental. We know that there are impediments at the moment to help developing countries to be more attractive because the risk of developing countries are so much greater than developed countries. So there are changes in the Basel Convention, for example, that may come up, and some of the suggestions that the circle of finance ministers are working upon. So we got submissions from 116 countries in the beginning of the year for the building up of the 1.3 trillion report. The UNFCCC has made a SINCE report. We debate that in Bonn. It was a really good debate and consultation with parties and non-parties. Now there is a new moment for submissions, we're looking forward to see what we're going to receive until the 13th of September. And based in all those submissions and consultations, the two presidents will deliver a report that will be partly to the negotiators to negotiate, but that will also give suggestions on how finance ministers, IMF, the Basel Conventions, development banks, what they can do to unleash the flow of money for developing countries.
That's very encouraging to know. But at the same time, one of the skepticisms that comes from developing countries, and it's something that we've seen historically, is that the push is for as much public finance as possible simply because of debt concerns that developing countries have. How much of the money that you think will come in does the COP presidency see in terms of coming in from public funds versus private? What is your view on that?
Obviously, we don't yet have finalized the report, but we know since the Paris Agreement that the amount of public money that's coming from developed to developing countries is minimum. It's really not substantive at all. They have been mobilized, some of the private blended finance through multilateral banks. The OECD report, that obviously is not an agreed methodology, says that they already achieved the 100 billion. But from that, the public money that's coming from cooperation and donation, we know is just a fraction of that. And the question is, can we expect, how much more can we expect from developed countries? Versus we also needed to look at countries like Brazil or India. We are more able to attract blended finance, cooperation, or investment. Other least developed countries, small islands, or some of the African countries, they really need just public money. So I think we needed to go into more detail of which type of resources is needed for each of the countries. That doesn't take the responsibility, the historical responsibility that developed countries have towards developing countries. That's what was agreed in the Paris Agreement. But we also cannot just stand still and wait for the public money to come. That's why countries like India or Brazil or China have developed many other ways to attract investment, competitive investments to our countries. For example, in Brazil, we developed our country platform. We developed an economic mechanism called EcoInvest and obviously sustainability bonds. So while developed countries are not fulfilling their obligations, I think especially emerging countries are not just standing still. We are doing our part. We fulfilling our responsibility to do with very little that's coming to us the maximum that we can take. But some countries, as you said, they're really in debt. They don't have the same abilities as big emerging countries like ours to be able to attract private finance. So for those countries, we need to ensure there will be public money coming to them to help them both on the transition as well as on adaptation.
Fair point. But adaptation itself, now that you've said that, it's primed to be amongst the key themes in COP30, and especially for India. Is there any hope that it will make its way into the final text? Because developing countries have been pushing for adaptation. Is the presidency putting any processes in place for that to happen?
Adaptation is an absolutely priority for COP30 presidency. We have said so since the beginning of our term as designate presidency, where we feel that it's gone the time that adaptation gets the attention it needs and deserves. Last year was the first year that we overcome 1.5 degrees. We've seen with our eyes on the devastation that's going on all over the world, in Brazil, in India, in the US, in Europe, with floods, heat waves, and droughts. So we unfortunately now need to talk about adaptation as seriously as possible. So we need to put that as a priority. So we hope at COP30 to be able to deliver a package of outcomes and outcomes on adaptation, both related to the negotiation as well as on the action agenda. On negotiations, we know the topics that are there. The indicators of the GGA is a fundamental topic. Obviously, the dialogue from Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation dialogue is absolutely key topic, but we know that this is not enough to take adaptation as serious as we need it. We need to talk about finance. We need to know how development banks and multilateral development banks will deal with the adaptation issue. We need to make sure that private sector also contributes to adaptation. We need to talk about early warning systems, nature-based solutions, health. And so there is, I think, several topics that will be either on the negotiation or on the action agenda that will make up a strong package for adaptation. And most of all, we need to have NAPs. We need to have every country doing their NAPs, updating their NAPs, and we should communicate NAPs. We have realized, for example, that only developing countries are communicating their NAPs as regularly as they can, but we also want developed countries to do so that we can also learn how developed countries are dealing with adaptation. So I think there is several issues that we'll be debating. And one thing about adaptation is that real people understand that directly because it's affecting their lives. So sometimes mitigation is a little bit abstract to real people, adaptation is not. And that's when we wanted to be a COP that talks directly to people's life. Yet again, adaptation becomes a key topic.
Thank you. You talked about adaptation, which you're saying you're looking forward to seeing the plans from countries, but the other plans that countries are to give in submit are the NDCs, and they would come in and submit that. You've been urging them to submit the NDCs by September, but a majority of them haven't done so. In case most NDCs are not submitted before COP, how will that affect negotiations?
So first of all, I'm quite optimistic that most NDCs will be communicated by the COP30 in Belém. We have been talking to several delegations, to several countries. President Lula, together with Secretary General Guterres, have held a summit in March. To call upon every leader to do the NDCs. President Lula have been also discussing that bilaterally. We will have at the Secretary General's meeting now in September another summit with every head of state, urging them to deposit or to communicate the NDC. And we have heard China and the EU came up with a declaration that both countries said that they will announce the NDCs, or the region and the country will announce the NDCs by COP30. We had just last week a meeting with the Latin American and Caribbean countries and ministers, and again we got very, very positive feedback from ministers that they are working on the NDCs and will communicate it. And one aspect that I think will be a very different process from NDC 2.2 or 0.2 or the first NDC that we all did, I have a feeling, and by talking to everybody, that the quality of NDCs that people are preparing, countries are preparing, will have a much better quality than the initial NDCs that we did. We can see every country doing sectorial NDCs by energy, agriculture, forestry, transportation. Many countries are trying to evaluate the cost of implementation of those plans. So you can see that the detail of NDCs and the quality of NDCs hopefully will have improved. So we are looking forward to receiving most of the NDCs by COP30. Everybody knows if we wanted to strengthen multilateralism, the first pillar of our multilateral climate governance are the NDCs. So we're expecting countries to communicate, but also we'll be looking at the level of ambition as well as the quality of the NDCs that will be coming up.
That is an interesting thing you're saying, because one of the things that we are trying to understand is, and you've said this before yourself, that we are far from the quantity and quality of NDCs required to cut global emissions. Uh, while the presidency doesn't really have a say in individual NDCs of different countries, will the presidency intervene if the quality of the NDCs are not sufficient as per the Paris Agreement standards?
No, the presidency cannot intervene. It's national determined contributions. Uh, Obviously, we will be hopefully receiving most of the NDCs by COP30. We understand there will be the synthesis report, as we have it every year from the UNFCCC, that will do some analysis both on the level of ambition and the quality of NDCs. And I think the world expects that COP30, not Brazil, but COP30 as a whole, and all the parties will react to the synthesis report or say something about the synthesis report. So let us see what COP30 and the bulk of the countries how they wanted to react to the synthesis report. It's going to be really, really important, and hopefully we'll be much closer to 1.5. And if we are not, I think the world expects us, the leaders, to be able to react to it.
Well, let's hope that comes through. The other interesting part that COP30 has is the global ethical stocktake, which is going to be a central part again of COP30. How will it help drive action in terms of implementing the first global stocktake undertaken at COP28?
Yes, that's actually one of the reasons we also came to India now, was to be part of the Asian ethical globe stocktake. So this is an initiative led by President Lula and Secretary General Antonio Guterres, with the leadership of our Ministra Marina Silva. We have had, was our third ethical globe stocktake. So we had one in the UK, with the former Prime Minister Mary Robertson, co-leading with Ministra Marina. We had one in Colombia, co-led between Ministra Marina and Mrs. Bachelet from Chile, and we had the one here just yesterday, and it was incredible, because I think what we are hoping that the circle of the ethical globe stocktake will give us is a moral and ethical compass of what COP30 needs to achieve. We know that there are gaps on finance, we know there are gaps on technology, we know there are gaps on NDCs, but above all, when we see so much what we already have and so much that we can, and there are so many solutions, the questions that the global ethical stocktake is asking is, why are we not doing more and faster when we know that so many people will be and are suffering from the consequences of climate change? What is taken that from us, humanity, that are not all of us getting together to speed up action? And it has been very interesting to see how the different philosophers, youth, scientists, policymakers that have been part of this process, how they interpret why we are not doing enough. Lack of compassion, lack of solidarity, what is missing. But for us at the presidency, we take in a lot of good energy from the ethical globe stocktake. They will present the results to the leaders in the Leaders Summit in Belém, and we are absolutely sure that the outcomes of the ethical globe stocktake will give leaders to feel that the responsibility that we have are really in our hands to make a difference, and will give us the courage to make the difference that is expected from leaders from all over the world.
We look forward to that also, to be able to hear what the outcomes are and what you hear and the document that comes out of that. But at the same time, when you talk about not doing enough, one of the parts of not doing enough is the transitioning away from fossil fuels. And Last time also there was no consensus regarding the limit or the process at COP28 or at COP29. What plans are in place for the Amazon COP to deliver when it comes to fossil fuels?
Now, first of all, let us recall that in COP28, we took, after 28 COPs, a very, very important step to say that the 198 countries that agreed to transitioning away from fossil fuel in an orderly, just, and equitable manner. So that agreement is there. Every country signed it, and we should never doubt. What I think we needed to answer collectively is how we're going to do that. Is this a process? There isn't just one way of doing that. There are many different ways. We need to respect people's, each country's ability, capacity, and different mix of fossil fuels that many countries have. Like in India, you have a lot of coal. In Brazil, we have a lot of oil. Other countries don't have even oil or coal. So all of us needs to act. I think the sincere report on the Globe Stock Take will also give us a good feeling to see if this has been reflected in our NDCs, if countries have put transitioning away in our own NDCs, and what else can we do it collectively at COPs to encourage countries. And one thing that we have seen as COP30 presidency is that at the moment, we don't only, and President Lula has been talking a lot about that, we are really dependent upon fossil fuel, not only from that energy source, which is the fossil fuel source, but we also have economic dependency from the income that the fossil fuel royalties and obviously the financial system is dependent nowadays on fossil fuel. There are many workers that depends on fossil fuel. So many of the products that we consumers consume, plastics everywhere, we all depended upon fossil fuel. So we need to diminish our dependency on fossil fuel. We know that our economy, our societies have been built creating that dependency for the last 200 years. So there is a climate urgency for us to make this move quickly. At the same time, we know it's a complex process, and what we needed to do at COP30 is to find out ways that we can both individually as countries as well as collectively within the COP's environment to see what are the concrete steps we needed to go forward to implement the agreement that has been taking place in COP28.
I want to ask you a little bit of a sensitive question there because that's something that India faces also when it comes to its coal use. And like you said, Brazil also has oil. And you have recently announced one of the biggest oil exploration plans at the mouth of the Amazon River. Are you facing flack for that? What kind of, questions are you facing when it comes to that, especially because there are critics who are talking about the rise of of having a conflict of interest when we are talking about telling the world to cut down emissions, and at the same time as COP host you have this announcement that was made. How are you dealing with that dichotomy?
Well, first of all, we are very blessed in Brazil that we have a very, very active, knowledgeable, and dynamic civil society. And yes, they really questioning the government and obviously private sector on that topic, which is very welcome. As you know, most of the emissions from Brazil comes from deforestation. And Brazil has faced that challenge of cutting its own emission and stopping deforestation has been a priority for the government, and President Lula has been announcing for more than 2 years now on our agreement to stop deforestation by 2030. Brazil is again also blessed by having a very an electricity and an energy sector that is very decarbonized. 90% of our power sector is renewable, and more than 50% of our energy sector comes from renewable. Nevertheless, we also exporting oil, as you said, and a lot of that oil either we use within Brazil or we are exporting as well. And as I said, I think Brazil, as many countries, have those tensions on all the different dependencies that we have, the income dependency that we have from fossil fuel as a country as well. And some countries have that. But I don't think that is a contradiction of us just as presidency of a COP, because I don't know of any other presidents of COPs that has not been dependent on fossil fuel. Obviously, the Emirates or the Azerbaijanis were also fossil fuel producers, but even countries like France depends on more than 65% of their energy sector depends on fossil fuel as consumers. So either as a producer or as a consumer, unfortunately, all of us at the moment are depending on fossil fuel, and we all have contradictions, and we need to face those contradictions, and that should not paralyze us. That should empower us to take the steps that we need to take to diminish our be it economic, be it producing dependency, be it consuming dependency on fossil fuel, but all of us need to take a step forward.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thanks a lot for taking our questions today. We've understood what Brazil hopes to deliver at the COP through our conversation. Your insights on accountability, the global ethical stocktake, and the practical steps for negotiators gives us a clear sense of what to watch out for in the months ahead. Thank you so much for joining us. If you liked this episode, listeners, please subscribe to COP Conversations. We'll be back with more sharp takes on from the inside and around COP in the coming weeks. Thank you.